Emma Carter's life had become a steady rhythm of early mornings, long meetings, and quiet evenings that felt more like routine than rest. At 38, she worked as a marketing manager at a mid-sized Chicago firm, respected for her professionalism and calm presence. On paper, everything looked perfect. A stable job, a kind husband, nice home, but somewhere beneath that surface, something in her heart had gone silent. She couldn't quite remember when she stopped feeling excited about her life, but she knew it had happened gradually. Like a dimming light, she never noticed until the room was dark. Her husband, Daniel, was gentle and dependable. He loved her in a quiet, practical way, always there, always polite, but distant in the ways that mattered most. Their conversations had become about grocery lists and schedules. Their smiles, once full of warmth, now carried politeness instead of passion. Emma didn't resent him. She just missed feeling alive. That Wednesday started like any other. The office buzzed with a low hum of computers and small talk. Emma sat at her desk reviewing a client presentation when she heard a knock on her door. Without looking up, she said, "Come in." "Emma Carter," a deep, familiar voice said, still running the show. "I see." The pen slipped from her hand. Her heartbeat faltered. She looked up, and there he was. Ethan Blake. Her mind froze. It had been 15 years since she last saw him, but she would have known that voice anywhere. He stood in the doorway, tall, confident, and somehow unchanged, though his hair now carried streaks of gray that only made him look more striking. He smiled, that same disarming smile that had once made her forget everything else around her. "Ethan," she whispered, disbelief softening her voice. "What are you doing here?" He stepped closer, holding a file. "I'm your new client, apparently. My company just signed a deal with your firm. I had no idea you worked here. Not until I saw your name on the paperwork." Emma blinked, trying to steady herself. Of all the offices and all the cities, he had walked into hers. "Well," she said after a pause, forcing a professional smile. "Then welcome to Carter and Bloom Marketing." "Thank you," he said, his tone warm but steady. "It's been a long time." 15 years, she replied before she could stop herself. Their eyes met, and for a moment the years disappeared. Memories rushed back. Laughter in college libraries. Late night walks in the rain. The night he told her he loved her before leaving for a job across the country. She never followed, and he never came back. Their goodbye had been unspoken, a silence that had lasted a lifetime. She motioned for him to sit. "Let's talk about your project," she said quickly, needing something to hold on to. For the next half hour, she tried to focus on the presentation, but her mind drifted every time his eyes found hers. Ethan's voice had the same quiet strength, his confidence effortless. He listened intently, occasionally smiling in ways that made her heart ache. When the meeting ended, she gathered her papers to hide her trembling hands as he stood to leave. He said softly, "You look the same, Emma. Maybe even better." She laughed nervously. "You always did know how to flatter people." "I'm not flattering," he replied, still looking at her. "Just noticing." Her chest tightened. "You should be careful saying things like that. I'm married now." He nodded. "I saw the ring." Then, after a beat, "But I also saw the look in your eyes." She froze. "What look?" "The one that tells me you're still trying to forget something you never really let go of." Before she could respond, someone knocked on her door. Her assistant stepped in with a file, and just like that, the moment ended. Ethan gave a polite smile. "I'll see you soon, Emma. We have a lot to work on." When he left, she stood there for a long moment, unable to move. Her office, usually her place of control, suddenly felt too small, filled with echoes of the past. That evening on her drive home, she couldn't stop thinking about him. His voice, his calmness, the way he looked at her as if time had stood still. She felt guilty for even thinking about it. But something inside her stirred, something she hadn't felt in years. Daniel greeted her with a smile when she came home, asking about her day. She smiled back, told him about a new client, and left out every detail that mattered. They ate dinner in silence, the kind that comes not from anger, but from habit. When she went to bed that night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She tried to convince herself it was nothing. Just surprise. Just nostalgia. But when she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan's face. She could almost hear his voice saying her name. The next morning, she arrived at work early, hoping to bury herself in tasks. But as she sat at her desk, she noticed a small envelope placed neatly beside her laptop. There was no name, no signature, only one handwritten sentence. Some things never really end, do they? Her pulse quickened. She looked around, but the office was still empty. Her mind raced. Was it him? How did he get in? Why would he leave that note? She told herself it was harmless, just Ethan's way of teasing. He had always liked being mysterious. But still, the note felt heavier than paper should. All day. She tried to stay focused, but her thoughts kept drifting back to him. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart jumped. At lunchtime, her phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't an email. It was a message from an unknown number. "I'm downstairs. 5 minutes." Emma's breath caught. She read it twice, her heart thudding. Logic told her to ignore it. But emotion, that long-buried, restless part of her, urged her to go before she could talk herself out of it. She grabbed her coat and headed for the elevator. The ride down felt longer than usual. She could hear the hum of her heartbeat in her ears. When the doors opened, there he was, standing near the glass doors of the lobby, sunlight catching in his hair. He looked up the moment she stepped out. And that same quiet intensity filled the air again. "You came," he said simply. "I shouldn't have," she replied. "But you did." She tried to sound firm. "Ethan, this isn't appropriate. I'm married. You're here for business." "I know," he said softly. "But I also know you're not as sure of your world as you pretend to be." She stared at him, unsure whether to be angry or moved. "You don't know anything about my world anymore," smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But I remember who you were, and I can still see her right now." The way he said it, calm, certain, left her speechless. He didn't reach for her or step closer. He didn't have to. His presence alone was enough to stir everything she had carefully locked away. "I should go," she said quietly. He nodded. "Then go." But she didn't. For a long, fragile moment they just stood there, two people caught between what they had been and what they couldn't be again. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I'm here for a week. We'll see each other again whether you plan it or not." She opened her mouth to reply. But he had already turned to leave, his confidence leaving her dizzy. When he disappeared through the revolving door, she stood frozen, her pulse still racing. That evening, she sat at her desk long after everyone had gone home. The lights dim, the note still lying beside her. She read it again, that single line that now felt like a promise and a warning. Some things never really end, do they? For the first time in years, Emma realized she was afraid not of losing control, but of wanting to. And when she finally gathered her things and stepped into the night, she couldn't shake the feeling that her carefully built life had just begun to shift one heartbeat, one memory, one forbidden spark at a time. The next morning, Emma tried to start her day like nothing had happened. She told herself it was just an old connection, just a brief encounter that would fade once the project ended. She had work to do, deadlines to meet, a marriage to maintain. Yet, even as she repeated those words in her head, she knew they didn't carry the same conviction they once did. Ethan's presence had shaken something inside her, a quiet longing that had been asleep for years. And now that it had been stirred, she couldn't seem to quiet it down. By noon, he was back in her office for another meeting. This time, he didn't knock. He simply stepped in with his usual confident calm, holding a folder under his arm. "Morning," he said, his voice casual, as if nothing unusual had happened the day before. Emma straightened her papers. "Morning. Let's get started." They talked about campaign strategies, brand colors, and target audiences. But beneath the surface of their conversation, there was tension. It wasn't loud or inappropriate, just the kind of energy that made every pause feel heavier than it should. When she leaned over to show him a draft, their hands brushed slightly. It was nothing a split second, but it made her heart skip. She pulled back quickly, pretending to adjust her laptop. You're still doing that? Ethan said with a small smile. Doing what? Running away from the moment. She frowned, avoiding his gaze. I'm not running away. I'm being professional. He leaned back in his chair, eyes never leaving hers. You've always been professional, Emma, but you've also always felt too much. That's what made you brilliant. She didn't answer. His words felt too close to something she didn't want to admit when the meeting ended. He stood, hesitated for a second, and then said quietly, lunch tomorrow. Just to talk. About the project. She asked. He smiled faintly. If that's what you need to tell yourself. Emma wanted to refuse, but instead she found herself saying 1 hour. That night she tried to tell herself it was just a business lunch, but deep down she knew it. Then the next day they met at a quiet restaurant a few blocks from her office. It wasn't fancy, just comfortable and tucked away. When she arrived, he was already there, waiting with that same composed expression. You look tense, he said as she sat down. I am. This feels strange. I know, he replied gently, but sometimes strange is just another word for something we've been missing. His tone was calm, almost reflective. They talked about everything but work-old friends. The places they used to go, the choices that led them both here. She learned that he had been married once too, briefly, but it hadn't lasted. I got too busy chasing success, he said. Turns out success doesn't keep you warm. Emma smiled softly. No, it doesn't. There was a quiet understanding between them, two people who had built good, stable lives but lost a piece of themselves along the way. When they finished eating, Ethan looked at her for a long moment. I don't want to make things complicated for you, he said, but seeing you again it reminded me of who I used to be. Who we used to be. Her throat tightened. People change, maybe, but sometimes the parts that mattered most are still there. She didn't respond. Instead, she looked out the window, watching the rain start to fall. It was easier than meeting his eyes. They walked back together. And at the building entrance, he said quietly, I'll see you tomorrow, Emma. Her voice was barely a whisper. You will. By the third day, everyone in the office noticed a subtle change in her. She smiled more. She laughed at things she used to overlook. But behind that lightness, she was struggling. Every time Ethan entered her office, her calm composure wavered. He didn't flirt or cross lines, but his presence filled the space with unspoken tension. That afternoon, they stayed late finalizing a presentation. Everyone else had gone home. The office lights dimmed, leaving only the soft glow from her desk lamp. This feels like college again, Ethan said, sitting across from her. Late nights, bad coffee, too many ideas. She laughed quietly. Except now we have real responsibilities. And fewer excuses, he replied. Their eyes met again. And this time she didn't look away. Ethan, she said softly, we can't keep doing this. Doing what? He asked, talking like this, looking at each other like this. You know what it means? He was silent for a moment before saying, You think I came here by accident? Her breath caught. What do you mean? He leaned forward slightly, his voice low. When I saw your name connected to this company, I knew it was you. I could have sent someone else, but I came myself because there were words I never said, and I couldn't carry them anymore. Emma's heart raced. You shouldn't have come. Maybe not, but I did. The room fell quiet again, only the hum of the city outside breaking the silence. She wanted to tell him to stop, to leave before she made a mistake. But part of her didn't want him to go at all. I've spent years being safe, she said finally, always doing what's expected, always following the rules. And somehow I ended up feeling empty. He looked at her with a softness that undid her. Maybe what you need isn't safety. Maybe it's honesty. Her eyes filled with tears she hadn't expected. She turned away, brushing them quickly. I can't do this, Ethan. I know, he said gently. But you're already doing it? She stood, collecting her things. I should go home. He nodded, but didn't move. Emma, he said as she reached the door. This isn't about me trying to take something from you. It's about reminding you that you're still alive." She hesitated at the doorway, torn between logic and feeling. Then she walked out without another word. That night, she sat in her car outside her house for nearly 20 minutes before going in. Daniel was watching TV. He asked how work was. She said it was fine. Everything sounded normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. She couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying his words, reminding you that you're still alive. The next morning, she found herself dressing with unusual care. She told herself it was for an important client meeting. But she knew who she was really thinking about. When Ethan arrived later that day, he looked at her for a moment and smiled as if he could read her mind. "You look different," he said. "Don't start," she warned gently. "Just an observation." The day moved quickly, meetings, emails, deadlines, but every shared glance between them carried weight. It was an invisible pull, stronger each day. By Friday, their campaign presentation was complete. It was a success-a-thon's company was thrilled. That should have been the end of it. Yet when he stopped by her office that afternoon, he didn't come to talk about work. He stood by the door, watching her quietly. "So this is goodbye then?" Emma didn't look up from her laptop. "It should be, but," he asked softly. She closed her laptop and finally met his gaze. "But it doesn't feel like it." He took a slow breath. "I'm leaving town tomorrow." She nodded, forcing a calm expression. "Then I guess that's that." But when he turned to leave, she said his name, stopping him. "Ethan." He looked back, waiting. For a long moment, she said nothing. She just looked at him, her heart caught between the past and the present. Then she said quietly, "Thank you." "For what?" "For reminding me of something I'd forgotten." He gave a small, knowing smile. "Then I did what I came here for." And with that, he walked out. Emma stood there long after he was gone. Her emotions tangled relief, sadness, gratitude, longing. She didn't know what would happen next, or if anything ever would. But something inside her had shifted. She felt alive again, scared, but alive, as she sat back down, the city lights glimmering outside her window. She realized that sometimes the most dangerous feelings weren't the ones you acted on. They were the ones you carried quietly, forever changed by a moment that never fully became what it could have been. A week had passed since Ethan left Chicago, and Emma had tried her best to slip back into her routine. She went to work, attended meetings, cooked dinner, and pretended everything was fine. But the truth was, she wasn't the same person anymore. Something had changed quietly, but completely. It wasn't about Ethan alone. It was about what he'd made her remember. She missed the way he looked at her like she was more than a list of responsibilities. She missed feeling seen. And though she had no intention of crossing the line, she couldn't deny that the line itself now haunted her thoughts. One evening, Daniel came home earlier than usual. He brought takeout and flowers, something he hadn't done in years. "I thought you could use a little surprise," he said with a smile. Emma forced a grateful expression. "That's sweet of you." They ate quietly, the sound of rain outside filling the silence. Then Daniel said, "You've seemed distant lately. Is everything okay at work?" She froze for a second before replying. "Just a lot going on with a new client." He nodded, not pushing further, but she could tell he sensed something was off. He reached across the table and took her hand. "You know, you can talk to me, right?" Her throat tightened. "I know," she whispered, but she did and single quotes till later that night. Oh. As she stood by the window watching the rain fall, her phone buzzed. She didn't recognize the number, but her heart already knew. Made it home safe. Just wanted to say thank you again. Was simple, polite even. Yet it stirred everything she had been trying to bury. She typed a reply, then deleted it. Then typed again. "Hope everything's going well." She hesitated but hit send. A minute later, the reply came. "It's fine. But I keep thinking about that last day." She stared at the screen for a long time, then turned it face down. She couldn't do this again. But she also couldn't unfeel what she felt. The next morning, Emma went to work early, hoping distraction would help. But when she arrived, she found a small envelope on her desk. Inside was a note written in Ethan's familiar handwriting. "I didn't say goodbye properly. Dinner tonight? Just to talk. If not, I'll understand. No signature, no pressure, just a choice." She stared at it for minutes, her heart thudding. The smart thing would be to ignore it, to throw it away and move on. But curiosity, the same quiet pull that had drawn her from the start, made it impossible. That evening, after hours of debating with herself, she found her feet walking toward the small restaurant near the river where they had met once before. Ethan was already there, sitting by the window. When he saw her, his face softened. "You came. I almost didn't," she said quietly. "I know." They sat in silence for a moment before she said, "Why did you leave that note?" He took a deep breath. "Because I didn't want to disappear without saying the truth. Which is that I still think about you. That I never really stopped." Her chest ached. "You can't say things like that." "It's the truth," he replied calmly. "And I think you feel it too." She looked down, her fingers tightening around the edge of her napkin. "Even if I did, it doesn't change anything. I have a husband. A life. I'm not asking you to throw that away," Ethan said. "I'm asking you to be honest with yourself." His words stung because they were right. She had spent years pretending that being content was the same as being happy. But now she realized there was a difference. The waiter came, interrupting them, and for a few minutes they spoke about work-neutral, safe topics. But as soon as they were alone again, the silence filled with everything unsaid. "I'm leaving for New York tomorrow," Ethan said finally. "It's a permanent move." Her eyes lifted sharply. "You didn't tell me that. I wasn't going to. But I needed you to know before I go." She didn't speak for a long time. "Then I guess this is goodbye for real." He nodded slowly. "Unless you want it not to be." Her pulse quickened. "Ethan." He leaned forward, his tone low and steady. "I don't expect anything from you. I just needed to see you one last time to say that some people change you forever, even if you never end up with them." Her eyes filled with tears. She turned toward the window, pretending to look at the passing cars, but really? She was fighting to breathe. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Then don't," he said softly. "Just remember me the way I'll remember you." She smiled faintly, even as her heart broke. "You make everything sound like a movie." He chuckled gently. "Maybe because with you it always felt like one." They talked for a while longer about small things, safe things, but every word carried the weight of goodbye. When they finally stood to leave, he reached out and held her hand for a moment longer than he should have. "Take care of yourself, Emma. You too." And just like that, he was gone. Weeks passed. The project ended and life slowly returned to its rhythm. But Emma felt the difference in herself every day. She noticed the sky more, the quiet moments more. She found herself being more present with Daniel, more honest. One evening, as she and Daniel cooked dinner together, he said suddenly, "You seem happier lately." She smiled softly. "Maybe I just started remembering what matters." He looked at her curiously. "And what's that?" She paused, stirring the sauce before answering, feeling alive, appreciating what's right in front of me. Daniel reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I miss that version of you." "So did I," she said quietly. They ate dinner together, laughing about old memories. It wasn't perfect, it never had been, but for the first time in years, she felt connected again. Not because of what she had with Ethan, but because of what that experience had reminded her to seek. A few months later, Emma was traveling for work when she found herself on a quiet street in New York, out of habit. She glanced at the cafe across the road and there he was, Ethan, sitting at a table. Reading. Her breath caught. She stood there for a moment, unsure whether to go over or walk away. He looked up then, almost as if he'd felt her there, and their eyes met. For a second, everything stilled, the noise, the people, the rush. Then he smiled, just a small, knowing smile. She smiled back. Neither of them moved closer. They didn't need to. The moment itself was enough. They had already said what mattered. The rest belonged to time. Emma turned and walked away, her heart strangely light. As she stepped into the cab, she looked out the window one last time. He was still there, watching. But there was peace in his eyes and in hers too. She realized then that sometimes love isn't about possession or promises. Sometimes it's about awakening a reminder that even in a quiet, ordinary life, your heart can still surprise you. When she got back to her hotel, she sat by the window and watched the city lights. She thought of the years ahead, of Daniel, of the quiet home waiting for her. She knew she would always carry Ethan's memory, not as regret, but as a chapter that made her more human. And for the first time in a long while, she whispered to herself with certainty, "I'm alive."